Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war and also just a general geopolitical news update. I'm going to talk about a number of different topics today. I'll cover some ground that I wanted to cover in my geopolitical update from, was it last night I did, where I dipped into connections of Reform UK to Russia, and there's a really good Byline Times article I wanted to more properly share with you. I'm going to be talking about all sorts of things, including obviously what's going on in the United States, not as much as I normally do, but there's a big section on a roundtable that Donald Trump had this morning with, or this morning UK time, with Pam Bondi and a whole bunch of other people talking about how they're going to annihilate Antifa in the same way that they've annihilated cartels, the Venezuelan boats, i.e. literally blown them up. And you're thinking, are you going to blow up left-wing activists in the US? You're just going to send missiles? Just crazy talk there. And of course, we're going to be speaking about what's going on with regard to Russia and Ukraine and inside Europe. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, tomorrow, I was just speaking to my other half, Jonathan Fink, the master of the Silicon Curtain. We are going to do a 12-hour live stream tomorrow. Now, it's probably going to be pretty chaotic. He's going to be hosting. Normally, I host these things and he just jumps on and does it live. So hopefully I can work out the tech behind what needs to be done. And it can go live on both channels. I will be in and out, I think, for the first 6 hours, probably there quite a bit. And then I've got to go out to the cinema with my missus. So I'm going to miss a big old chunk, and then might come back to it if I have time once I get back from the cinema. And that is going to be a campaign fundraiser for our Car for Ukraine projects, our autumn harvest campaign, and hopefully we can raise enough money to close out the campaigns, but we'll see how that goes. It's nothing I've ever done. People like Rick the Ukrainian have done this before, where he does some of his regular ones are like 4 or 5 hours long. But anyway, obviously you don't have to be there for all of it, but we'll be like a TV channel just on, and you can dip in instead of putting on BBC News or CNN or whatever, you can put on ATP Geopolitics and just find out some of the latest stuff that's going down. Is my big microphone on? Probably not. Thank you for pointing this out, because it does this. I don't know why it does that. So hopefully that's a better sound for you. A little bit deeper and more resonant or something. Thank you for pointing that out. Please do so when I am live and things don't sound or look as they should. Right. Okay. So now it's time to share what I'm going to share with you. So let's have a look what I need to do. I hope all of you are well. There's a bit of noise coming from behind me. I hope that's not putting you off and whatnot. This is Kiev Independent. Yeah, that's what I want to share with you. Okay. So we are going to start in, well, I was going to say in Europe. Actually, we're going to start with NATO first and then go to the EU and concern ourselves with the drones that have been sighted across Europe, and also the intrusion into airspace of Russian planes. NATO is reportedly weighing up stronger military response to Russian provocations. According to 4 NATO officials, the goal is to raise the cost of Moscow's grey zone operations and strengthen deterrence following a series of incursions by Russian drones and aircraft, according to the Financial Times. So actually, here, No Reports goes into a little bit more detail concerning the FT article. NATO is reportedly preparing for stronger pushback against Putin's hybrid warfare. Plans include deploying armed drones along the Russian border and relaxing rules so pilots can open fire on Russian aircraft based on radar or threat assessment rather than visual confirmation. I think this is all good news. This will enable NATO to start being more robust with their response to Russia. And I think we would all like to see Russian drones get shot down by NATO. Not that we want a world war, but
Russia is waging war, hybrid warfare, you can call it whatever you want, is waging war on Europe, on NATO, and getting away with it. And it's about time we stood up as a collective and said, no, sod you, you're not going to do that. So that's good to see. And we're also seeing a strengthening of EU resolve as well. So European Parliament has supported a resolution authorizing the downing of Russian aircraft and drones in the EU airspace. So obviously, you know, NATO can say one thing, but I guess there's going to be a tension between NATO rules or individual country rules through NATO. So say, for example, Poland might say, right, as a NATO member, NATO have changed their kind of guidance, and now we're okay from a NATO point of view with shooting down Russian drones. But the EU says actually, technically, it's the EU airspace as well. So, you know, it needs to be approached from several directions. Now, Anton Gerashenko has a look in further detail. Russia bears unequivocal responsibility for the actions of Polish, Estonian, and Romanian airspaces, says for the actions in, says the European Parliament. The European Parliament encourages, quote, any initiative which enables the EU and its member states to take coordinated action against all violations of their airspace, including shooting down airborne threats. So MEPs demand a unified EU response to Russian violations and hybrid warfare threats. MEPs strongly condemn Russia's, quote, reckless and escalatory actions of violating the airspace of EU and NATO member states, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Romania. They also denounce the deliberate drone incursions aimed at critical infrastructure in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. They are, MEPs say, part of Russia's, quote, systematic military and hybrid warfare and provocations against the EU and its member states. Now, this is interesting and welcome rhetoric, because actually, you know, we don't really know who is flying these drones over Denmark, over Norway, Sweden, Germany. There have been these arrests of some Chinese individuals, 8, I think, in Norway, then another 2. I can't remember, was that Sweden, Norway, or Denmark? Anyway, I've been wondering really who is behind this. So it's easy for us to say it's Russia, because, you know, likelihood is that they have something to do with it, and it kind of fits the form and the context. But actually, it also could be Chinese individuals, it could be hobbyists, it could be this, it could be that. And we hear nuggets of news coming out. So I think it was a Danish saying that this looks professional, I think was the word they used. And I think the Germans were saying that. And of course, we had Belgium as well, had flyovers that went from Belgium to Germany, from military bases in Belgium to Germany. So it does look like this is kind of state actors or coordinated professional activity. And there have been these sort of various claims that, we think Russia are behind it, but we haven't seen any hard and fast evidence. But if the European Parliament is being so forthright with laying this at the feet of the Russians, then there must be some evidence out there. I think, you know, these guys are going to be generally fairly careful with their rhetoric, and if they are starting to really explicitly blame Russia, I imagine there is evidence out there to support that the Russians are doing it. And, you know, I think there are claims that they were military style drones or something like that. You know, that it looks more than just sort of hobbyists and whatnot doing this. Now, staying inside the EU, Zelensky has said that Viktor Orban bases his election program on criticizing everything that the EU offers. He fuels his electorate on a more radical electorate on this criticism. And Ukraine is one of the main incentives for his party's rating to grow precisely on the basis of blocking Ukraine. It's a bit of funky language here. There are several ways out of this situation. This is a change of rules. Changing the rules is being discussed in the EU's lobby. When the majority makes a decision, we need to get to that point. In other words, Zelensky saying, look, the EU are looking at changing the rules to get around Hungary. But the problem is the EU turned down moving to a qualified majority voting situation. I don't know why. There must be some reason, because Hungary have been frustrating everyone with being able to veto any major decision. And so they go and say, okay, let's have a qualified majority voting system, and then EU states vote that down. So there's something's going on there. Second option, says Zelensky, is for partners to use other levers to influence the position of the Prime Minister of Hungary. There is no other way yet. Together with the European Union, we believe that by the end of this year, Ukraine will be ready with 6 clusters. That's EU accession clusters. It is going to be fascinating to watch the development of the Hungarian elections due to take place. Is it spring next year? Someone in the live chat, I'm sure, will know this. I think we've got Hungarians there. I don't know if Oink is in the chat today, but yeah, I think it's spring next year, which is fast approaching. Right, time is flying, and Viktor Orban looks more and more vulnerable. And so the question is, as I keep saying, how much will Orban try and rig the elections? And there are different ways of rigging elections. You can do it a soft way and a hard way. Soft way rigging by sort of rigging the information spaces, by manipulating the information spaces, filling them with disinformation and propaganda in a very like undemocratic kind of way. We've seen that happen, obviously, in other places where Russia have been directly involved in influencing, but this would be the nation itself. Now, we have seen that with regard to the US, where Donald Trump and the Republican Party had effectively control of Twitter to the point where it was overwhelmingly and algorithmically benefiting Trump and the GOP in the run up to the election. And I guess it's those ways that we're most likely to see Orban work. In fact, there's already a huge amount of propaganda out there. Was I seeing the other day the amount of money that Orban spends on that kind of stuff is phenomenal. I'm sure I saw some statistics on that. So Orban's very used to that. And then, of course, you've got the more explicit, hard ways of rigging. And I don't know if he can get away with doing that by being an EU country, and whether that's a step too far for Orban. But it's going to be definitely one to watch, that Hungarian election. Okay, moving on. Just see. Okay. Max25 here saying that Belgium has, well, actually, this is Politico. Belgium has laid out its red lines for using Russian assets to fund a 140 billion euro reparations loan to Ukraine. So at the moment, they're creaming off the profits of these assets and then using them to underwrite loans to Ukraine. So at the moment, so far, I think the EU has loaned this year at least 15 billion euros, something like that, to Ukraine, which is pretty significant. And actually, the Ukraine don't need to pay those loans back because the repayments are made by the profits from the frozen Russian assets. Now they're trying to do something a little bit different, which is use the frozen Russian assets, but not use them. It's a little bit confusing, but it appears to be, well, if Russia don't, we will give these frozen Russian assets back to Russia unless they don't pay reparations, in which case they'll eventually go towards reparations. But at the moment, they're underwriting some kind of other larger loan. Instead of just using the profits, they're going to somehow use the assets themselves to underwrite a loan, something like that, to Ukraine. I still haven't fully got my head around this, but Belgium is just saying, hang on a second, we're the ones that actually hold all of this money through Euroclear. And they have laid out their red lines, including an agreement by EU countries to share all current and future risks related to the plan for an amount exceeding 170 billion euros. So that's fair enough, which is say, hang on, if all goes wrong, we don't want to saddle Belgium with the entirety of the of the money that is going to Ukraine if there is some kind of legal ramification, or I don't know. So Belgium lays out its red lines, and I understand that. EU capitals are racing to quell Belgium's concerns around the loan ahead of a crucial summit of EU leaders on October the 23rd. Securing a political agreement at the summit would pave the way for the bloc to put forward a legal proposal shortly after. So there's possibly a lot riding on that. Now, doesn't surprise me whatsoever. And some people have been commenting that the Russian interference campaigns in the Moldovan election were actually very underwhelming. They spent supposedly an awful lot of money, differing numbers. Some people saying as much as 200 million. Actually, some people saying, I think 400 million was one number I saw. The FSB, so the Russian Secret Service, Fifth Service leadership, initiated a major investigation concerning embezzlement of funds by their own FSB officers, says Igor Sushko. Funds which were allocated to corrupt elections in Moldova. They suspect only a sliver of the bribe money actually made it to Moldova in recent years. Well, yeah, doesn't surprise me there. Corrupt officials will do what corrupt officials do. And yeah, they will. Yes, I guess it's a bizarre thing to expect people doing corrupt things to use the money without another level of corruption. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, you've tasked me with doing something really, really illegal, really, really like bad with this money, and you give me a whole load of money, and you're expecting me to be honest about how corrupt I'm going to be. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it doesn't surprise me that corrupt people are going to take that money in and take a little cut in that money because they're corrupt. That's what they do. Anyway, sorry, that's just my little sidebar. The thieves were indeed thieved. Bobo Uzala. This seems to be the case. Now, Tim White says, in a desperate attempt to regain control over another ex-Soviet state, Putin has met with Azerbaijan's President Aliyev. So this is quite a big meeting that's been going on this morning. People analyzing the way that they are sitting and all this stuff. But Aliyev and Pashinyan, the Armenian leader, Azerbaijani and Armenian leaders have both kind of got closer. They've actually come to some kind of peace agreement with the help of Turkey and eventually the United States. The US is involved in some infrastructure, I think, and logistics inside or around that corridor with those two nations, which is super important. And Russia's been kind of pushed out. France has been rubbing shoulders with Armenia. A lot of French military gear, I think, is going to Armenia. And so Russia and the Kremlin, Putin, have lost influence in this region. This is a really key region. We're also seeing Kazakhstan stopping Chinese trucks going to Russia and maybe hoiking out drone components and whatnot. So that's another interesting dynamic in the larger region. There's been this really deepening crisis in the relationship between Russia and Azerbaijan since that plane was shot down by the Russians. And then Russians started arresting diaspora community members, Azerbaijani community members, and then a couple of them were dismembered and but they executed, certainly tortured. I think there were executions as well, horrible things going on, and it's been going really south, that relationship. So this is an important meeting as far as actually Putin is concerned. And he's got some, well, Putin has admitted that they did shoot down that plane. So that's I guess, something for Azerbaijan as a sort of concession, if you like. What's more, the indicted war criminal has finally directly admitted Russia's air defense caused the crash of the Azeri passenger jet, killing 38. So Russian state media source TASS says in a conversation with Aliyev, at a meeting with Aliyev, Putin once again expressed his deepest condolences to the families of those killed in the Azal plane crash. Putin linked the Azal plane crash, among other things, to the presence of a Ukrainian drone in the sky. The Russian president clarified that on the day of the Azal plane tragedy, Russia was tracking 3 Ukrainian drones that had crossed the Russian border. 2 missiles fired by Russia's air defense system did not directly hit the Azal plane, but exploded several meters away, Putin said. The Azal flight crew was asked to land in Makhachkala, but decided to proceed to its home airport, Putin said. So admitting some things, but not everything there. Putin tells Aliyev Russia will pay compensation related to the Azal air crash. Yeah, good luck with getting that. 2 missiles, fired, exploded several meters away, says Putin. Now, I find this pretty good news, actually. Very good news, especially since the sanctions appear to be coming from the United States. So Serbia's main oil firm, NIS, which is majority owned by Russia's Gazprom, is now fully under US sanctions. Washington's waivers expired yesterday, ending months of extensions meant to protect Serbia's energy supply. Serbia imports 80% of its oil this way. Someone's saying, you're 100% certain. The US has postponed the sanction on the Serbian oil company, NIS. A majority owner of the company happens to be Gazprom. Oh, well, today they announced it's not extended, contradicting the previous report. So actually, yes, so that is the case. So it has not been extended, which means the actual sanctions kick back in properly, and Serbia's oil concern there, which is majority owned by Russia, is sanctioned. So that's really good news. Now we need to watch all of these goings on very carefully, especially since there are minerals that have been found in Norway. Now Germany's just found an absolute bucket load of rare earth metals, and is it lithium, that mean that battery production won't be reliant upon China. But China does have huge rare earth metal deposits and a stranglehold on rare earth metals, particularly as far as the United States is concerned. Now, Sky News is reporting that China is strengthening controls on rare earth metal exports ahead of a Xi-Trump meeting. China's Ministry of Commerce also warned of possible restrictions on foreign arms and semiconductor manufacturers. I'm going to talk a little bit later about trade. I might talk about the CPTPP. So free trade, essentially, because, rewind. So I was talking about how the EU is whacking on tariffs on steel on the UK and saying that as much as I don't like that because it's hitting the UK, Europe aren't beholden, the EU isn't beholden to the UK steel industry doing well, right? And in fact, they are trying to protect their industry, so they're whacking on protectionist tariffs. We wouldn't be suffering if we were part of the EU. And I think at the moment, our economy is insanely precarious, especially with the advent of AI. The more I think about it, the more I think we need, from an economic point of view, to rejoin the EU. I'm actually just thinking that far more explicitly now. I think interesting if Labour actually try to differentiate and try to use that as a campaign thing next election, given that there's a rise of reform and this very, very vocal right wing that is also going to be anti-EU. And I just wonder whether that could be an interesting campaign strategy. But nonetheless, I think with the advent of AI coming on and the potential for losing an awful lot of jobs, I think the security blanket of the EU would be, and having that free market access to the EU would be insanely important for UK. But the EU is under a lot of pressure because essentially what has happened, like the root of all problems, is that Donald Trump is attacking everyone with tariffs, just everyone. And everyone is then trying to scrabble around to work out how to mitigate against these tariff impacts. So the EU, that I think they're still negotiating stuff, but it's looking like those American tariffs are going to really hurt the EU. So the EU is starting to, as far as I understand, they have been for some months. I haven't seen recently, but like 5 months ago, they were very much thinking about trying to get into a trade partnership called the CPTPP. I wonder if I can find this for you. So some of you will know about this, some of you won't. Here we go. Right. So the CPTPP, the Comprehensive Progressive Agreement for Transatlantic Pacific Partnership, is a free trade agreement that includes the UK and 11 Asia, Pacific and American countries, creating a vast free trade area for 12 countries with a combined GDP of £12 trillion. This is from a UK point of view. The agreement was signed in 2018 and entered into force in 2019, with the UK becoming a member on the 15th of December 2024 after signing the accession protocol in July 2023. Now, this might help to kind of bridge the gap between us being a member of the EU in the UK. So there's now talk that the EU being sort of playing around with the idea of joining this, and they might now have a renewed effort to join this given the tariffs from the US. This will then make the biggest trade bloc in the world without the US. China have previously wanted to join, but actually they've been stopped from joining by, I think, Japan and Australia. And this, and there are a whole other bunch of nations around the world, all over the world, that want to join this. And it could be a useful tool to mitigate against the US tariffs. And it also might not seek to, but it might end up isolating the US even more and kind of punishing the US for starting these trade wars with bloody everyone, and everyone going, well, we need to protect ourselves, but if we can protect ourselves together and work as a big kind of collective in terms of trade, then we will mitigate ourselves against those tariffs from the US. But also, because the tariffs are hurting China, or they have tariffs against China, China are then trying to dump a whole load of cheap, and this is what the EU was reacting to primarily, which is China dumping this glut of steel, cheap steel. The problem with China and free market economics is that actually a lot of their companies appear to be subsidized by the state. So it's not really free market economics. So the Chinese can then produce loads of cheap stuff subsidized by the state, and they can outcompete against free market entities that aren't subsidized by the state in other countries. So then they can undercut our steel production. Then our steel production goes out of, it crashes, and then we lose our forges and whatnot, and then China has a monopoly type thing. So we need to protect our industries. The EU's protecting industries, but unfortunately we're on the outside of the EU, so the UK gets battered by that. But maybe something like the CPTPP could be an option. I mean, the UK is already in there. It could be an option for the EU in trying to fight back against the US. But then the US would see that if the EU properly joined the CPTPP, it would see the EU as doing an aggressive move against the US, and the US would then seek to punish the EU more. The problem we have at the moment, and I'm sorry, I know I'm still sort of arguing with certain people, Launcher IT, whoever it is, who keeps doing these massive comments that tries to excuse Trump's behavior and is like over lying about Portland and stuff. He's like, mate, you're onto a loser. He's just blatantly lying, and he's militarizing a city on the basis of making up a problem that doesn't exist. And if you think that's fine, then we're speaking different language, and it's very hard to debate with you. But yeah, I forgot where I was going with that. But you've got this. Yeah. The root cause of all the problems at the moment is the fact that Donald Trump is just a bully going around the world, bullying everyone else, whether they're friend or foe. He's just the guy on the playground that's nicking the lunch money from everyone, like not just people he doesn't like, his mates, his little team around him. He's nicking their lunch money. Oh, apart from Russia. Nicking Russia's lunch money. So I mean, we are starting to see a change of position on Russia, and in fact that's probably a good segue into this. So I wonder how much of Donald Trump's change of position on Russia is to do with, and I shared this with you this morning, to do with polling coming in to very clearly show that Republicans are actually very supportive of a harsher approach to Russia. Now, this is possibly, it's a chicken and the egg situation here. I think Trump pivoted and he's brought along Republicans with him, but then he can look at these stats and go, so I'm justified in pivoting, and then continue that pivot to an even deeper level, i.e. greater sanctions on Russia and more aid to Ukraine, because actually most everyone supports that. So 72% of Democrats and 73% of Republicans support arming Ukraine and sanctioning Russia. 71% of Dems and 86% of Republicans support additional economic sanctions against Russia. Interesting that Republicans are well above the Democrats there. So I don't know what underwrites that. 76% of Dems, 86% of Republicans think Europe should stop buying oil from Russia and instead buy it from the US. 55% of Dems and 66% of Republicans think governments that buy oil and gas from Russia should be punished with tariffs. And of course, yeah, someone points out, actually, the US imports over $5 billion worth of Russian products. And, you know, they get a lot of stuff from India through Russia, whilst claiming that other people shouldn't do that. So, but anyway, those stats, assuming they are at least somewhat correct and accurate, that's incredible. And Trump, and I've said this for a long time, I said right from the start that Trump could come out the gates on January the 21st and sanction the crap out of Russia and give all sorts of weapons to Ukraine, and he would bring people with him. Yeah, he might lose Tucker Carlson, so what? And Marjorie Taylor Greene, so what? But the broad base would actually support him in what, basically they'll support him whatever he does. So he should have done the right thing at the beginning, and he would have been supported for doing so. Now, Ukraine apparently is to nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize if he secures a ceasefire with Russia. Part of me is like, oh, really? Do you start having to do this as well, Ukraine? Honestly, don't stoop to this pathetic level. And then part of me is like, yep. If anything's going to get him to try and do the right thing for you, then promising the Nobel Peace Prize is it. And do you know what? Who gives a toss, really? Nobel Peace Prize is some abstract thing. Okay, so it's not like, oh my God, you know, you're giving him mineral deposits, or this, or that. So there's part of me thinking, well, do you know what? If it works, if it gets Trump on side, then hey, why not? Okay, so Trump, who has boasted about ending 7 wars since returning to office. I mean, 7 wars is when he's feeling a little bit conservative. Normally, when he's at his most bombastic, it's 11 wars. Has actively campaigned for receiving the prestigious award. It's just such a weird thing. I mean, it shows you how tone deaf he is with regard to moral discourse. Like, you don't go and say, oh, you know, Citizen of the Year, I should get Citizen of the Year, me, because I'm so bloody awesome. Yeah, I'm so kind. I'm so generous. I'm the nicest man in the world. And it's like, no, that's not how it works, mate. There's the thing. Here's a geek sidebar. In biblical scholarship, there is the Mosaic tradition, whereby traditional Christian and Jewish exegetes, people who study the Bible, say that Moses wrote the first five books of the Bible. It's called the Pentateuch, or the Torah in the kind of Jewish context. And that is 100% not true. Like, Moses did not write it, but Moses arguably did not exist as a single human being. But I've written a book on that, which is going through the editing process at the moment, very slowly. But anyway, that's not the point. There are lots of reasons why we know Moses didn't write the book, primarily, or the first 5 books of the Bible, primarily because it's full of multiple sources, and it has repetition and redundancy and all these different elements of evidence of multiple sources, right? So multiple sources all over it. So, you know, no one person wrote it. Also, it writes about his death, and that's kind of weird, like, because as far as I know, not many people have written about their own deaths after it's happened. But also there are wonderful little things where you're like, yeah, I'm fairly sure Moses wouldn't have written that. And one of them, and I'm going to bastardize the quote here, but the quote is, Moses was the humblest man in all of the lands. And it's like, imagine Moses sitting down saying, I'm going to write, I'm the humblest man of all the, it's like, you're not very humble if you're writing that you're the humblest man. So in other words, he didn't write that. That was someone talking about Moses from a third party point of view. Anyway, that's a little bit of biblical exegesis for you that's relevant to this in some weird tangential sort of way. Okay. Yeah. Oh, geek sidebar. I like those. Jason, good to have you on board, mate. Yes, so there you go. Let's get back to what I'm supposed to be talking about, which is I thought that was Marco Rubio kissing. I just squinting my eyes. Oh, he's kissing Trump. No, he's not. He's whispering sweet nothings in his ear. We're just going to talk a little bit, and I know I mentioned it this morning, so sorry for the repetition here, but this is Rubio informing Trump about the Gaza peace process. By the way, we've done a peace process, which is kind of like, okay, you expect this, big things happened. But there's always this question, and this is the same for any leader, right? Which is, how much is a leader of any country actually involved in the diplomacy of that country? So when he keeps saying, I have solved 7 wars, right? Maybe 11 if you include these 4 pre-wars that I've also brought peace to. You're thinking, well, okay, if that's true, it's not true. Of course it's not true. But imagine it was true. How much would Donald Trump be involved in actually doing that? Like, he said that he brought peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but now he can't even say Azerbaijan. He keeps calling it Azerbaijan, and then he can't remember Armenia, keeps calling it Albania. Then he said there's a war between Armenia and Cambodia. And then when he was asked the other day about Pashinyan and Aliyev, he didn't know who they were. And you're like, okay, so you weren't really involved in any of this. You just got them together in a room. We were told, by the way, that's the leader of that country. That's the leader of that country. Here's what we've arranged. And that you're going to get them to sign something. You're going to shake hands. We're going to have a photo op, and you're going to look amazing. And Trump goes, that's awesome. And then a couple of days later, he's forgotten really what the details are. And he's just like, I solved a war between Albania and Cambodia, whatever. So, okay. But, you can't expect a leader to be involved in all of these meetings and negotiations and so on and so forth. When you've got trade, you've got domestic, you've got international trade, domestic trade, the economy, immigration, defense, all this stuff going on. Like, the leader's not going to be at the center of everything. However, I'm at the position where I think Trump is not really involved in anything. And he's just getting wheeled around by people like Stephen Miller. He doesn't know anything about, he has no ideology. He's got no knowledge about these different domains, right? So he's signing executive orders that are handed to him. They explain what the executive order is. And then he goes, oh, that sounds really good, because he's never heard it before. So the nuts and bolts of the entirety of this administration in the US is done by everyone else, because he's not bringing any ideology to the party. He's not coming with anything. Like, he has no expertise. Like, say what you like about Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden was a career politician. And if you're a career politician, you know about, like, economics and trade negotiations and, like, legislation. You've been signing legislation. Like, you can slag people off for being a career politician and not really understanding people or the electorate or whatever, because you just in real life, because you never had a real job, you've just been a politician all your life. But if you're someone like Trump, who's got no knowledge about legislation and the legislative and the legislature, and he's got, he just he doesn't do any reading. It's like, what's he bringing to leadership? And I mean, this is a lot of talk about this idea that basically he is not making any decisions. He's not got any ideology to impart any thinking to those making these decisions. Like, if he would sit down with the experts on Armenia and Azerbaijan, what does Trump bring to the table other than bombastic rhetoric and strong arm? He's just basically the bully that will say, well, if you don't do this, we're going to bomb you. Or if you don't do this, then we're going to whack tariffs on you. That's basically what Trump does, as far as I can work out. So this kind of makes sense, but also I think it just shows you, well, this next one particularly shows you that he's not really in control. And this is absolutely extraordinary. So here we have a note that Rubio handed to Trump, I presume about the peace deal, the Gaza peace deal, showing that A, he wasn't involved in doing it because they've gone and done it over there. And while you're having this meeting with whoever this is, Mark Carney, I don't know, someone, they are sorting this peace deal out, and now they've done it. And now the note here says, quote, you need to approve a Truth Social post so you can announce the deal first. In other words, we now know, which we knew anyway, but there's more evidence to suggest he doesn't write his truth, which would be fairly impossible anyway, because they're being written right throughout the night, all day. Like that big one he wrote about Ukraine that was a complete pivot, right? He was in a meeting with freaking Zelensky at the time. There's no way, like, that's a half an hour. It'll take you half an hour to put that post together on Truth Social. And he had been speaking at the UN, then he'd gone and spoken to Zelensky, then he'd gone to speak to Macron straight away. So, you know, it's impossible for him to write this stuff. So other people are writing it. And here he said, right, we've written this Truth Social post for you. It's about the peace deal that we've also done on your behalf. And you need to approve this Truth Social post so we can send it out. So you get the plaudits for sorting out the peace deal. Now, what I said this morning is that, okay, so this is just one little example around a peace deal, Hamas, Israel, Gaza, yada, yada, yada. But how reflective is this? How indicative is this of his entire leadership and what's going on all the time, which is that decisions are getting made on his behalf, and those decisions are being made by whom? And if they are the Heritage Foundation aides and advisors, whether it be, I don't know, Russ Vought, Tom Homan, Stephen Miller particularly, then we understand why the government is making all the decisions that they're making. We can also understand why you were so unbelievably wrong on Russia and Ukraine. And so I think what happened is the reality hit perception and it came to a skidding halt. I don't know, maybe sometime, probably started when he went to the NATO meeting, and then he had the EU leaders in, then he had Zelensky in, then this relationship started warming between him and Zelensky. Then he started getting actual intelligence on Ukraine, and it's like, hang on, so the maps that we're being given from Russia that Stephen Miller's shown me, or whoever it is, these aren't correct. Oh my goodness. So suddenly, you know, there was a reality popped up its head and said, hello, I'm here. And by the way, the entirety of Ukraine isn't rubble. And by the way, Russia's in a load of trouble. And by the way, Ukraine has attrited an absolute ton of Russian equipment and personnel. And by the way, this is where the war really is at the moment. And he went, oh my goodness, Ukraine can win this. And it's all connected. Like, do you know, like I always say to you, I've got imposter syndrome. Do I really know what I'm talking about? But like everything I'm predicting about Trump and have predicted about Trump seems to be coming true. Like I've said for a long time, the guy is ignorant and he's being controlled by the people around him. And every bit of evidence that I'm seeing suggests this is the case. There's just nothing at the moment suggests that he is anything other than a very useful tool for the people around him. Now, then you have this. So OMG, the Wall Street Journal reporting based on discussions with White House officials that the unhinged post Trump sent pressuring Bondi on the Comey case was indeed intended to be a DM. So, okay, translation. A Truth Social post was published some weeks back that had him, dear Pam, blah, 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 blah. And it was very clearly a personal, it's supposed to be a DM, a direct message, a personal private message to Pam Bondi done through Truth Social Media, his own platform, to ask her to hurry up and get his political opponents like Adam Schiff and Jim Comey, etc., etc. And that showed a whole bunch of things, but not least that, well, actually, let's go through what it shows us. So they realized after Bondi called them, so the Trump team, and I don't even think Trump would have written that. It would have been Trump's team writing that, just like we've seen with this sheet is you need to approve the team's writing of this Truth Social post. So then there was a Truth Social private post that was accidentally published to the public, and then Pam Bondi called them, and then they deleted the post. Now this means the president is doing state business on his own insecure social media platform by direct message. So that whole thing about the email servers about Hillary Clinton, load of bollocks. It was nothing to do with really worrying about the actual security there. It was always a stick to beat Clinton, because you've had all of the signal gate issues that have gone on, like several times that's now happened with signal being used. And now you've got the president using his own media platform. So that already breaks the emoluments clause, which, you know, he's already making money off being the president by ensuring that his own platform that he makes money off is the platform that is used to communicate officially between departments. Or at least between him and departments. And it's indeed, he was indeed pressuring the independent DOJ to weaponize against opponents unduly. So that is against the norms and against the rules, I believe. And that the DOJ is playing ball instead of resisting. I mean, what the actual F? Any other president would have been impeached for any of these matters. When will Republicans grow a spine, says this person? How long until Truth Social gets hacked and Trump's official state business is everywhere because of DMs? So Adam Cochran is not happy about that. So the Wall Street Journal then doing that piece on that DM actually being, or that Truth Social post actually being supposedly a DM initially. Right. Then we are going to move on to Venezuela. So I showed you, was it the third or fourth Venezuelan boat that was blown up the other day? So I had another Venezuelan boat blown up, and I did a whole video on this. And obviously not everyone watches everything I do. And some people are like, I don't have a problem. I've got to disagree with you here, JP. Like, that blowing up the Venezuelan boat is blah, blah, blah. These are horrible drugs, people. I'm like, so let's just relitigate this one more time for the record, right? It is illegal to blow up a boat of civilians in international waters, especially when those civilians are from another country. It's just illegal, right? Now, it might be morally good. You might think it's good that drug dealers are blown up, but we'd have no definite knowledge that they are drug dealers, right? The first boat was actually going in the other direction that they were initially claiming. They claim it had 11 people on board and drugs. I mean, really? And anyway, but even if they were drug dealers, right, you can't go and blow up drug dealers from a foreign nation in the middle of the sea. It is still illegal, right? You may think it's morally good, but it is illegal. For example, like, just think about that happening in your neighborhood. If you're looking across the road, right, and your neighbors across the road are it's a drugs den, right? You wouldn't expect missiles to suddenly fly in and blow up the entire house and kill everyone in there. Was there a baby in there? Was there an innocent person there that was nothing to do with the drug gang? Was that, how do we know? Like, you can't just kill. You have to, there's something called due process, right? This is why we have laws. The state is not allowed to just go around killing people that they don't like. You have to have due process to make sure that those people were the people you thought they were, that they had committed the crimes you thought they had, and that they are indeed punishable by whatever the sentence is for that, as written by your legal codes. What you can't do is blow people up because you think they're that. That is illegal, and it opens up a slippery slope to, well, if you're saying that you can do that to drug dealers, why is it? Surely it's okay to do that to, I don't know, other people you think are enemies, like, I don't know, political opponents. And then suddenly the US is sending missiles in to blow up Democrats on holiday in the Caribbean on a boat. They're the enemy. So, like, there is no legal justice. And also, you can look at I can't remember what it exactly said and where it was, but I remember showing you the military guidebooks from the US military themselves, and it's breaking international law and the US's own guidance. Like, is all shades of illegal, and you shouldn't advocate for that happening because it is a very slippery slope. Where do you draw the line? I mean, for a start, they're not even your citizens. You have killed foreign citizens. Anyway, that aside, they've just had a vote on this. So the Senate has rejected a measure to stop Trump from unilaterally striking Venezuelan boats, 48 to 51, broadly along party lines. But one Democrat went the other way, which was John Fetterman, who is pretty controversial at the moment and is quite often voting against the Democrats. And then Rand Paul and Lisa Murkowski. So Rand Paul is your libertarian senator, and he is not happy with the government overreach. So I can fully understand that. And Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, who has been one that might vote against the government on a number of occasions, as it ended up being the deciding vote for the government. She's got an awful lot of stick for that because actually you can tell deep inside she's not a big fan of what the Trump administration is doing. And she said as much a number of times. So it's interesting that those three crossed different lines there, across the aisle in different directions. But still, because there's a majority for the Republicans in the Senate, they still won that one 51-48. But it's pretty incredible there that they'll be like, yeah, we're fine with blowing up civilians abroad in boats. It's absolutely incredible. The rule of law, the rule of international law means nothing. It's staggering. That is absolutely staggering. Now, talking about Venezuela, so it's all heating up with Venezuela, and it was argued that blowing up these boats wasn't really about taking out cartel members. It was about stoking and poking this hornet's nest so that the Venezuelans retaliated. And that then brought about a war, which is what the US want. They want to depose Maduro, all of that oil, I'm sure they'd like to get their hands on in some way. And yeah, so the US are not big fans of Maduro, but there is a real threat that this could then lead to a long protracted kind of situation in Venezuela that the US would be involved in, and it wouldn't be for the first time, right? So the Venezuelan president has launched the Independence Plan 200 in the integrated defense zones in northern Venezuela. The plan includes measures to protect critical infrastructure, including ports and airports, and the mobilization of military forces to Maiquetía International Airport. The photos show several Book M2E air defense systems. So they've obviously got they've got a close relationship with Russia. They have a lot of Russian gear at a military base in Caracas, and anti-tank concrete barriers placed on a highway near Maiquetía International Airport, or whatever. So there you go. Venezuela, watch this space. Now, we are going to go to listen to what I think is an insanely dangerous, batshit crazy round table. It's not particularly round table, is it? A round table about the destruction of Antifa. And it is so typical that at this round table, they just get a bunch of right-wing online influencers as well. Here's Jack Posobiec, who is just a bad dude.
Mr. President, thank you so much for having us here today and holding this this roundtable. Antifa is real. Antifa has been around in various iterations for almost 100 years in some instances, going back to the Weimar Republic in Germany. Mr. President.
What's he talking about? Well, yeah, okay, Antifa does go back to them because Antifa literally means anti-fascist. So the American army was Antifa. The British army was Antifa in World War II. The Allies were Antifa. There is no Antifa thing. It's not a thing. It's just this umbrella term for people who want to take it upon themselves to protest against fascism. And now you're claiming it's an actual organization and they are a terrorist organization and you are going to destroy them. And they've been around in different, I mean, why you would listen to Jack Posobiec, I have no idea. But this is where it gets like really, really problematic. And we can, then link this. The reason I've got this after the Venezuela thing is because this is linked to Venezuela.
We're not going to stop at just arresting the violent criminals we can see in the streets. Fighting crime is more than just getting the bad guy off the streets. It's breaking down the organization brick by brick. Just like we did with cartels, we're going to take the same approach, President Trump, with Antifa. Destroy the entire organization from top to bottom. We're going to take them apart. Thanks to your bold leadership and the designation of Antifa as a terrorist organization, which is exactly what they are, Americans will no longer tolerate their unhinged violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pam.
So what you've seen is the designation of like cartels, you know, the Venezuelan cartels invading the US, and that was what allowed them to do emergency measures and blah, blah, blah. And then you're saying, okay, so Antifa are now a terrorist organization. These cartels are terrorist organizations. We're at war with them. And we've just blown up a bunch of boats of these cartel members. And now we've got Senate supporting us blowing up a bunch of boats of these cartel members, and Antifa are now equivalent to these cartel members and are also an extremist organization. So when I said to you, it's opening up a slippery slope, you essentially have permission from Pam Bondi here, as far as I can work out, to blow up Antifa in the United States. And then who is Antifa? Well, it's whoever we designate as Antifa. You let the DOJ sort it out, and then we'll just blow them up. And it's, am I overreacting? Well, I think I'm justified in being slightly worried that there are some incredibly dangerous parallels here. This is just incredible what is going on in the States at the moment. And just, you know, this I'd like to argue. I'd like the guy that I'm arguing with on the threads, Launch IT, this guy that gives me all these long threads about how wonderful Donald Trump is. Donald Trump is telling you he's taking freedom of speech away. And this guy was telling me that Trump was by far and away the best person for freedom of speech, way better than Kamala Harris ever would have been. She would have been a disaster. I'm fairly sure that Kamala Harris wouldn't have unilaterally said, I'm going to lock you up for a year if you burn a flag. But that's what Trump has said. And he's actually justifying it as taking away freedom of speech.
1 year penalty for inciting riots. We took the freedom of speech away because that's been through the courts, and
we took the freedom of speech away. He's literally told you he has taken freedom of speech away here.
We took the freedom of speech away because that's been through the courts, and the court said you have freedom of speech. But what has happened is when they...
So the court said they have freedom of speech, but we took it away. So not only are we overriding the judiciary, but we're also overriding First Amendment rights. This is an absolute constitutional assault.
Riots. We took the freedom of speech away because that's been through the courts, and the court said you have freedom of speech. But what has happened is when they burn a flag, it agitates and irritates crowds. They've never seen anything like it on both sides, and you end up with riots. So we're going on that basis. We're looking at it not from the freedom of speech, which I always felt strongly about, but never passed.
Clearly not. Just what a hot mess of ideas and justifications there. Just incredible. And let's hear a little more on flag burning, shall we? So let's get some rando here.
Years now. So
thank you, but not rando, because this is Nick Sauter, who he just went up to, was he up in Portland himself? And then he got done for getting a little bit violent with some people there, and then that kicked up a big online fuss. But this guy is not cool, by the way.
Years now. So thank you guys so much for taking this seriously. And President Trump, you mentioned that flag. So remember, you put out a truth right after
that's right. I saw that.
Took this flag from that man that was burning it in the street.
Do you know who he is?
Oh yeah, I know exactly who it is.
So why don't you give it to Pam? Give it to the Attorney General, and let's start prosecutions.
Yeah, I actually.
They're just agreeing to go and arrest people. just in a round table, the president, oh, give me the info, mate. I'll get my guys on it. He'll be in prison by tomorrow night.
I have a second flag that he tried to burn as well. So I have two of them from
Well,
the
you
same
also
guy.
Oh,
saw
that's
what
2
happened
years. That's 2 years for that. Well, bonus.
when that flag started burning. Everyone went crazy. And that's when it started, when they started burning the flag. So thank you.
That's when
If you
what
could give the
started.
information, it would be great.
Absolutely.
And-
And at least that horrible night made you famous. You got
He was
something out
already
of it.
I got a text from the president of the United States, so I appreciate that.
And President Trump
It's all about being famous. It's about social media grifting. Oh, just everything makes me sick about this. And then so the whole, like, I go on about this a lot because it seems outrageous to me that Donald Trump is making decisions based on a complete falsehood that Portland is burning to the ground. And it's not burning to the ground. It is not. It is. So that is a lie. It's 100% a lie, right? And so he's sending in the army to put down something that's not happening, which will then cause the very thing to happen that you wanted to put down. So that it justifies sending in the army. And it's just, he is creating the problem. He is the arsonist and the firefighter. And this is insanely dangerous. This is what looks like dictatorship to me, what looks like autocracy. It's just like, I want to be able to flex my internal security services on the population, and I want to quash their ability to speak freely. In fact, we're going to lock you up if you burn a flag. And by the way, if you're an Antifa, if we designate any of you here as Antifa, you are a terrorist. And by the way, have you seen over there what we do with terrorists? Yeah, we blow them up when they're in boats. So we have no compunction of blowing you up. Yeah.
One thing I have to say is that Washington, D.C. was almost as bad. I don't know what could be worse than Portland. You don't even have sewers anymore. They don't even put glass up. They put plywood on their windows. But most.
This is just not true. Like, why is America not going nuts about this? Why can you accept a president sitting there and just lying, just literally, oh yeah, do you know it's full of aliens? Portland, have you seen it? There's like 10 billion aliens have come down and they've turned everyone into just huge mushrooms. And so as a result, we're going to nuke Portland. We are literally going to put a nuclear bomb in the middle of Portland and blow that whole thing up because there are that many aliens there and there are no humans left. There are just mushrooms. We have no compunction with blowing up mushrooms. Like, if he sat there and said that, I'd hope someone would go nuts, because he's saying equally ridiculous. Well, it's not equally ridiculous, but he's equally lying here.
I don't know what could be worse than Portland. You don't even have sewers anymore. They don't even put glass up. They put plywood on their windows. But most of the retailers have left. But Washington, D.C. was so bad. One thing.
Anyway, this is Portland. I'm just going to show you Portland now. In fact, it's so bad that the police in Portland are actually sort of joining in with the good vibes from the protesters that are burning the whole place to the ground. It seems like the war zone in Portland is more like a party zone, because just watch the Portland Police Department even enjoying their entertainment. Okay, I'll probably get a copyright infringement there. So this is what's going on in Portland at the moment. Is it burning to the ground? You've got a bunch of hippie type liberals just having a bit of a dance, and that's it. That's Portland burning to the ground. You know, in a few places a little bit more rambunctious than that, but it's not burning to the ground. Just absolutely unconscionable what he's saying and what is going on.
They have been so bold in making sure we're bringing those individuals to justice. One of the individuals we arrested recently in Portland was the girlfriend of one of the founders of Antifa, and that we are hoping that as we go after her, interview her, and prosecute her, we will get more and more information about the network and how we can root them out and eliminate them from the existence of American society. They have been so
eliminated from existence in American society. Now, I really dig here what Mehdi Hasan says.
They have been so bold in making sure.
So that's that same quote there. Mehdi Hassan said, I dig it as in, I don't like that he's having to say this, but he's absolutely on point. As much as I loathe it, the right-wing messaging machine is a sight to behold. They have, with astonishing discipline and effectiveness, conjured up an Antifa boogeyman out of nothing, and are now talking of nothing else when I can't remember them barely mentioning Antifa just months ago. So they're sending in the troops. They are calling Antifa terrorists, extremist terrorists. They are justifying blowing up Venezuelans on account of the same kind of labeling. And all the while, government shut down. Mike Johnson is refusing to swear in the new representative from Arizona District 7 that would push the voting to 218 and force the Epstein files to be released. Everything can be understood in the context of the Epstein files. Mike Johnson was asked about why he was not swearing her in last night, and it was embarrassing. It was cringe because he had no answer. It was terrible. It is horrendously undemocratic that they are stopping someone who's been voted in from being voted in, from doing her job to represent her people and to vote to get the Epstein files published. Meanwhile, they're distracting everyone with Portland burning to the ground. It's not. And Antifa being an extremist terrorist organization. It's not. It's not an organization. All the while, ICE is still going around collecting people. Here's an actual ICE. This is Greg Bovino admitting on camera that his agents can detain people if you look scared, change your demeanor, or grip a steering wheel too tight. As his unmasked agents walk around with large guns to scare you, they may arrest you for just that. I'd be pretty scared, and I'd grip the steering wheel a bit too tightly if I saw these guys. That'd get me arrested.
You look panicked when you see a Border Patrol agent. Perhaps you look scared. Perhaps your demeanor changes. Perhaps you're gripping the steering wheel so tightly that I can see the whites of your knuckles. There's a myriad of factors that we would look at to develop articulable facts for reasonable suspicion. You look panicked when you see a Border Patrol.
Oh dear. Anyway, so let's have a look at this happening here. I wonder which panicked, horrible person that 6 border guards are picking up now. Let's see what horrible person they've picked up here. Oh, a small child. Yeah, it's a small child, of course. It's a small child. It's a small child.
Señora, no tiene que decirle nada, si tiene papeles. What's your, yes, I am. What's your badge number? Are you a United States citizen? I am. Are you? Are? Okay, I'm going to need you to stay away from here. All right? Señora, ¿cómo se llama? Hey. Señora, ¿cómo se llama? No estoy pidiendo la investigación. Señora, ¿cómo se llama? La policía, su familia. Don't touch me. You're not allowed to touch me. Señora, ¿cómo se llama? Dígame su nombre. Dígame su nombre. Look at guys. Look at this fascist right here. Señora, dígame su nombre. Grítelo. She's in.
She's in. So that's a schoolgirl on her way to school, being taken away by ICE. Just put in a vehicle and taken away by ICE. And you're like, are we talking about? Oh, we're back to the whole fascism discussion again. It's just so, it makes me feel sick. This is it. That's what the country's become. Just it's awful, awful. And then this is the other one that lots of people are talking about at the moment. The guy that you're going to see is an unarmed priest, and he is shot in the head from a short distance with a rubber bullet. This is a priest. I'm no religious man, but I'm fairly sure you shouldn't be shooting priests in the head with a rubber bullet from about 20 yards. Yeah, so that's happening. Now, final one on American politics here. So the question is, where's it all going? Let's hope that democracy is still able to play out. It's interesting that an Alaska Democrat, Mindy O'Neill, has just won a mayoral race in Fairbanks in Alaska, flipping the city blue for the first time in 12 years. Is that a sign of things to come? Because all the special elections we're seeing at the moment are showing an incredible switch to the other side. There's a real shift. The needle is very much in favor of the Democrats. They are overperforming special elections, and there's just another one to add to the fairly long list we've had. So yeah, there is that. Okay, now I am going to just finish off this video by looking at some other stuff. I need to, where is it? Sorry about this. I hope everything is all okay with you guys. I'm now going to finish on UK stuff here. So we are going to look at this. I'm going to start with Macron and Applebaum. Where are you? No. We'll try that again. No. Window. Here we go. That's what we want. Okay. Right. I'm now going to finish up talking about UK politics a little bit, but I'm going to go to what I think is the single most important topic outside of, say, the war in Ukraine. But I actually think this almost underwrites the war in Ukraine. If you're thinking about how Ukraine was able to happen, like the prevalence of Russian influence online is at the heart of it. And I'm slightly worried now that in the UK, we've got a really febrile political atmosphere where loads of people are with pure vitriol are attacking our political establishment at the moment in ways that I've not seen before. And there is a boiling over into real life of the things people are saying online and have been saying for 10 years. So like Twitter's been like horrible for a long time, but it's even more of a cesspit now, right? But usually people said stuff online, and when they went into their real world lives, they would exist in a way that was slightly more humane and cordial. But we're starting to see people speak in a way that they speak online in real life. I was watching a video by a kind of liberal guy called Jack Dart, and he said that he went into his, I don't know, council building or something, and there are some people outside with flags and everything saying, can you sign a petition? It's against like boat people. We don't want them coming in here raping our children. And he was like, no, I'm not going to sign that because blah, blah, blah. And they then started attacking him, you know, just really visceral, swearing at him, all like went to town on him. And he did this video just afterwards saying, you know, it's pretty shaken, but this is where we're at the moment in our public discourse. You know, that there is a bubbling over of from social media into reality. So it's dangerous to dismiss what goes on forums and in Facebook groups and on Twitter as, well, that's Twitter, it's not real life. Because actually, I think it really is real life. And the influence people are getting at the moment. I gave you the anecdote the other day where my partner's daughter, who's, you know, she lives here with us at the moment, she's got a baby. She went on holiday with her dad last week, and she was like, my dad's full of really extreme views now. I was like, well, yeah, I mean, my dad's been like that. Helen's dad, we all got people who our older generations, certainly all the ones we know, they exist in a particular political space which is informed just entirely by, you know, who they're talking to and the information spaces they're existing in. Now, my dad's got dementia now, but he would just sit. I've talked to you about the spiral theory. Like, he started being a kind of moderate Telegraph reading person. But then as the Telegraph moved further to the right, then he started moving, and then it was like, it's this spiral, it's this coextensive relationship between what you read and, you know, I wrote an article once, what drives you? Are you driven by what you read, or do you drive what you read? And actually it's a relationship between, is both. It's both and. So yeah, it is, what you read sends you in this direction, then you can take it a little bit further, and then you move on to reading this. And my dad went from the Telegraph to the Daily Mail to the Daily Express, and now he just regurgitates really hateful things. And it's very difficult for me to he will never change his mind because he's got dementia now, so like that's that. But for other people who don't have dementia, like my partner's daughter was telling me about her father, and like, where have you got these extreme views from? And now he, you know, former forces guy, but now out there in the private world, but then probably working from home and existing in an information bubble himself. And then you just go down these rabbit holes and you end up in the extremes, because we know the algorithms take you to the extremes. So for my opinion, and you know, you can relate this to whether it be, and again, I'm not saying immigration isn't an issue and et cetera, but we are getting told that it is the biggest single thing, and it's terrible, and they're coming to our country and they're raping everyone, and it's the worst thing on earth, and we're getting divorced from reality, and the discourse is becoming truly toxic, and it's really, really disturbing. You can see that in America, you can see it in the UK, you can see it in Germany, you can see it around the world, and we have to do something about it. So I was talking yesterday about, it's really interesting reading that that, in fact, I've got it in an actual newspaper I was reading yesterday that was very interestingly talking about how the international community are trying to deal with online challenges. And I would love to, it's not a long article, but I'd love to just dip into that. But I don't know where it is now. Here it is. So, and honestly, so I'm going to read this to you. It's just a short article, but this is, I think, one of the single most important things going on at the moment in the world, as far as like the future of humanity. When you have Elon Musk in charge of Twitter, when you have Mark Zuckerberg in charge of Meta, when you have Google in charge of, Alphabet in charge of all of that, and when you've got Jeff Bezos in charge of, you've got these entities that seemingly are becoming more and more powerful. Then you've got Palantir and so on and so forth, where it's getting to like these sci-fi futures. I was watching Alien Earth with my boy the other day, where the world is no longer countries, but it's controlled by 5 corporations. So you have these, corporations controlling the world. Now that's quite a common vehicle for sci-fi novels and worlds, but I see that is happening in this world. I think technology and communication now transcends borders to the point where, and corporations are multinational, to the point where they are now dictating trade policy. And I'm going to talk to you about that in a second with regard to the UK. So this is kind of where it's going. And it's deeply, deeply roaring. But anyway, Denmark to ban under 15s from using social media platforms. Denmark will ban social media for children under 15. The country's prime minister said yesterday. Mette Frederiksen used her speech at the opening of the Danish parliament to say that mobile phones and social networks were stealing our children's childhood. We have unleashed a monster, she said. Never before have so many children and young people suffered from anxiety and depression. Many young people also had difficulty with reading and concentration, Frederiksen told MPs, adding that, quote, on screens, they see things no child or young person should see. She said the proposal would affect several social media platforms, and there would be an option for parents to allow their children to use social media from 13. It is believed that the ban could come into operation as early as next year. Denmark is following the lead of Australia, which is introducing a ban on social media platforms, including Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, and YouTube for under 16s. Norway's Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre, has said he would enforce a strict minimum age limit of 15 on social media, raising it from 13. Støre said last year that it would be an uphill battle, but that politicians must intervene to protect children from the power of the algorithms. Denmark's digital minister, Caroline Stage Olsen, described her government's announcement as a breakthrough. She said, "I said it before and I'll say it again. We've been too naive. We've left children's digital lives to platforms that never had their well-being in mind. We must move from digital captivity to community," so on and so forth. But I think that applies to adults as much as children, where we are enthralled by digital captivity. Now, hopefully, you guys are captive audience for me, and but to some degree, I am a victim to my algorithm, but I'm aware of my algorithm. I know when it changes, and I know when I look at something that then sends me down this route, and I have a kind of metacognition about what's going on, and I hope that I have a strong enough moral fiber to make sure that I keep going in a direction that I think is good and right from my kind of moral intuitions. But other people, like I think about my son, one of my sons who's flirting with getting sucked down a particular rabbit hole, and it's deeply concerning. But then I see, talking about my partner's daughter's father, thinking like, well, he's been a victim to that, and she's like, he has these extreme views. Where did you get it? And like, she ends up being the only human being in his life that corrects him when he makes these outrageous claims about X, Y, and Z. I mean, she didn't go into details, but she was saying they were pretty extreme. She's like, I can't believe he's thinking like that now. We've always had these arguments, but now it's like, wow, that's just crazy. Anyway, I honestly think this is one of the most important pressing issues of modernity. This is our, yes, there are wars going on around the world, but Russia is able to generate enough support because it knows how to manipulate the algorithms, and because it's got Elon Musk on side, for God's sake. Like, we need to control media platforms online. It is deeply concerning. Now, I already spoke to you about what Macron said the other day, and he understands this. Macron gets this. We are very naive to leave our public space or to social media networks controlled by US or Chinese companies that don't share our interests and not interested in survival of our democracy. So he is saying this from a kind of European point of view. We need to wrest back social media companies and tech dominance from the United States. Let's look at a few more things he said. Again, I have said this to you before, but let's say it again. Naively, we have entrusted our democratic space to social media controlled by American entrepreneurs or Chinese corporations whose interests do not align with the survival of democracy. That there is, if I could sum up my worries in one sentence, it is pretty much that. Children are exposed to harmful content, fueling mental health and behavioral crises among youth. Public spaces encourage emotion over reason, negativity over positivity, driving extremes. Fear sells. Last election, fear sells online. You will spread things much more quickly that spread hate and fearmonger rather than joy. We saw that with Kamala Harris. Literally, the Harris campaign, one of the key themes was joy. They were talking about joy at their rallies, and it was all very positive. But it's not as clickbaity as people telling you that you're going to lose your job because an immigrant's going to come and nick it type thing, or they're going to rape your children. Oh, you heard that? Share. Rather than Kamala Harris dancing to Beyonce. Public spaces encourage emotion over reason, negativity over positivity, driving extremes. Algorithms amplify this for profit. Our democracies were not designed for this. If we Europeans do not reclaim control of our democracy, in 10 years, those exploiting this infrastructure will have won. I'm telling you this now. My biggest concern is in 10 years, when Labour lose to reform in 2028 or 2029, like when AfD win in Germany, when Trump stays in past 2028, when Palantir and Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg have got together and defined our futures by creating the algorithms that control our thoughts, essentially, with a couple of steps in between. 10 years, we're not going to have a democracy that resembles anything like it should do. I'm deeply, deeply concerned. Like this worries me on a more long-term basis than the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine does worry me from a long-term basis, but like if Ukraine was to lose the war against Russia, it wouldn't necessarily mean the destruction of democracy around the rest of the world. But if we lose the war in information, and if algorithms control all aspects of our existence, then humanity is in trouble. It's in serious bloody trouble. And I think these are connected. Like, I think the war in Ukraine is very much connected to the information war and the information spaces. Russia is insanely good at manipulating online spaces. We will become a continent, says Macron, of conspiracy theorists, extremists, and noise. If we believe in democratic order, we must put science, knowledge, culture, education, and learning at the center. We must protect our youth and regulate social media with the same standards as democratic spaces. No hidden or fake accounts, equal responsibility, or published content. Otherwise, racism, anti-Semitism, and hate will triumph. Europe can rebuild a 21st century democracy, but it requires action. I really want to see some action on this. And, you know, say what you like about Emmanuel Macron, but I can't ever see Alice Weidel saying this. I can't ever see Marine Le Pen saying this. I can't ever see Nigel fucking Farage say this. I can't ever see Donald Trump saying this. Like, this is the rhetoric of a leader that understands the threats that pose us all. Threats that we face going forward as society. Like, I want to hear Nigel Farage say something like this, because if he doesn't recognize this, then he's the one that's benefiting from this. And my goodness, he is, because they manipulate the heck out of social media. Those people I mentioned aren't leaders, they're freaking abusers. And in line with this, what a fascinating article here that just came out yesterday, 2 days ago. GB News. So when Nigel Farage went out to the US for the House Judiciary Committee, and he was like, he had that GB News pin on, and he was like, oh, freedom of speech and blah, blah, blah. And Jamie Raskin was giving a hard time. One of the main reasons he was out there is for that, he was going to give a talk at a convention, a conservative convention, and he was starting up a GB News channel in the US. GB News US's expansion is feared to be a new way for Trumpian views to reach a UK audience. We have already seen our online spaces change in the UK, as we all have. We've also seen our news media landscape change. As BBC News and Sky News, you can argue that there weren't enough news channels in the UK, but we had pretty centrist, sensible news channels. They weren't infotainment. They weren't propaganda. People slag off the BBC, but then they don't understand that the BBC is different in programming from news. When you understand who the news, the political editors for the BBC are, you'll understand that they're not some kind of left-wing liberal thing. So what happens is people, I've said this a million times, people who hate on a BBC look at the fact you got gay people and black people in the EastEnders, and what's this token black person doing on a TV show? And oh my God, how liberal the BBC is. Oh, it's so liberal. And then not understand that, well, the programming is different from the news. And what they do is they take that and say, well, the news is really liberal. And they look at comedy shows that might be comedy shows about news and say, well, therefore the news programming is liberal. But when you look at the political editors over the history of the BBC, they've all been conservatives, right? Whether it be, you know, Laura Kuenssberg, Chris Mason, Nick Robinson, John Humphreys. I mean, these are, you know, Nick Robinson, bloody hell, he was in charge of the conservative students at Cambridge University or whatever, at Oxford. You know, these are dyed in the wool, some of them conservatives. So, you know, we had the BBC and Sky, which I thought did a pretty good job of keeping things fairly centrist and some degree boring, but just like news reporting and not going down the opinion thing that you see on MSNBC and Fox News, right? Where it's just complete partisan. But then we've opened up the market to GB News, which is just a mouthpiece of Trump and Farage, and Talk TV. And they're both, which is Rupert Murdoch. And both of those are anti-woke, just all they'll do is propagandize on behalf of Reform Party. I don't know how they've got through Ofcom regulation. They do keep getting fines, but they are just propagandistic. Now, interesting article here. So White House backing was on full display. So this, how much of this do we read? It's probably okay. Let's not go into the full details here, but it looks very much like, you know, with giving press passes to these guys, and you know, GB News. This is very clever, by the way, of Trump and the American administration, which is GB News. They know is the Fox News of the UK. We give them preferential treatment to the White House, and then if you want to see what's going on in the White House, you want to get access to that, you've got to watch GB News, not BBC and Sky. So GB News then become a propaganda arm of the US. And this is, as it says, GB News' US expansion is feared to be the new way for Trumpian views to reach a UK audience. White House backing was on full display as GB News launched The Late Show Live. Yes. So, yeah. I wonder whether there will be reforms, regulatory reforms in both the information spaces and the news media spaces in the UK. Now, going back to trade deals, and I've talked about this with you a number of times throughout my course of doing this channel. Some of you will recognize what I'm going to say as something I've said before. I have said to you that trade deals with the US will almost certainly have an aspect of drug pricing at the heart. We have an organization called NICE in the UK, which is this sort of Quango, sort of this organization that sets the drug prices. So we bargain for drug prices in the UK, which doesn't happen in the US. Okay, that's why drug prices are hugely expensive, because the drug companies, the big pharma companies, there is no collective bargaining in the US. And so the pharma companies set the prices to individual kind of hospital networks and whatever, and insurance companies around the United States. And it's just they dictate the price, and they reap the rewards of making stupendous profits on the back of screwing over people who are ill. In the UK, we have NICE. And NICE bargain the price. So you can't access all of our health service in the UK unless you bring that price down to an acceptable level that's more affordable for our taxpayers. They're doing this on behalf of the taxpayers. And what happens with NICE is 25% of the world's drug pricing is benchmarked on NICE. So the big American drug companies hate NICE because they get a really good price for drugs for the UK, and then 25% of the drug prices for the rest of the world are set on the UK levels. And what Big Pharma wants to do is make more profits. So they want NICE to be destroyed so that the UK NHS doesn't have the bargaining capability and has to pay whatever the pharmaceutical companies dictate they have to pay. And then 25% the rest of the world will have to do that as well. And then suddenly they take their whatever gajillions of profits and they multiply that by another gajillion, right? And they're making even more money. And some people are so rich they don't know what to do with their lives. Well done. Meanwhile, British taxpayers are paying through the nose for higher prices for drugs. And I've said forever that when we came out of Brexit, and I said this before Brexit, I said, if we come out of Brexit, if we come out of the EU and we have to do trade negotiations with the US, which we will, because we don't have the EU trade deals, we have to renegotiate everything. The US will get us to destroy NICE, and they will be forcing us because they're the one in the strong position. US is what, 350 million, we're 70 million. They're a lot bigger than us. Their GDP is a lot bigger than us. They have all the leverage. They have all the power. Whatever trade deal gets done will be to the benefit of the US and not to the benefit of the UK. It's just how it works. And that's why we should have stayed in the EU, because then we're 570 million people and you've got a lot of clout, and so you get a better trade deal. So that's to the benefit of our taxpayers. Now we get worse trade deals. We had a terrible trade deal with Australia and New Zealand, and we're bigger than them. We still didn't manage that, and bad trade deal with Japan. So luckily, recently, and again, well done, Labour, but they have come in and they've renegotiated. They've done a trade deal with India, and they're out there again trying to sort that out. The problem is the US. So there's this trade deal with the US that's done. We don't fully know all the details, and it looks like basically the US has us bent over a barrel. And what's going to go? Drug prices. Mark my words. I told you this many years ago, and I'm telling you again now. Right. Trump pressure to hike UK drug prices could cost the NHS billions, expert warns. If this happens, our NHS becomes unsustainable and our healthcare becomes unsustainable. Pressure from Donald Trump to hike UK drug prices could wipe billions off the NHS, writes the independent NHS budget, causing suffering to the, quote, vast majority of NHS patients, experts have warned. Health think tank the Nuffield Trust urged the government not to give in to the demands of pharmaceutical companies to raise prices, warning that the threshold for spending on new drugs is already too high. It says a new deal will only trigger further increased price demands and make healthcare in the UK more expensive. The warning comes as Keir Starmer looks set to bow to President Trump's demands to pay pharmaceutical companies more money, including increasing the threshold. The National Institute of Clinical Excellence, NICE, sets for spending on new drugs by 25%. So they're already putting up the amount of money they can spend on drugs by 25%. In an attempt to appease the Americans. The move is believed to be an attempt by the government to avoid a wave of new US tariffs over what President Trump believes to be an anti-competitive practices by the UK. Of course, it's not anti-competitive. It's actually getting drug companies to lower their prices. I mean, you can talk about it not being free market equilibriums that are doing that. But do you know what? When only single drugs companies have particular treatments for certain conditions, then they have a monopoly, which means it is not competitive anyway. So if like Eli Lilly says, well, we have the treatment for this, no one else has done it, we've done the R&D, and we're going to if you want this person with this type of cancer to survive another couple of years, you have to spend this much money, and we're going to take to you. Now, the UK would otherwise say, no, we're not going to pay that. You come back to us next time with a lower price and more evidence, and we'll look at it again. If not, you can sod off. And by the way, that's the pricing for 25% of the world. But don't tell us it's uncompetitive when our government does that, when it is not competitive, because the nature of these drug companies is kind of monopolistic in terms of the particular treatments for particular conditions. Now, it's not always the case. Sometimes there are multiple drug treatments and pathways, but you get my point. So the move is believed to be an attempt by the government to avoid a wave of new US tariffs over what Trump believes to be anti-competitive practices by the UK. Again, what we have here is the bully going around the world, acting on behalf of his corporations, whether they be tech corporations or pharma. However, in a report shared exclusively with The Independent, the Nuffield Trust warned that the current NICE threshold is already too high in terms of delivering value for money, as it does not take into account the cheaper benefits of the population of spending more money on GP access, A&E and surgeries, etc., etc. Pharmaceutical company shareholders will benefit, but the vast majority of NHS patients would suffer if this comes at the expense of improving wider NHS care, a senior policy analyst for the Nuffield Trust said. So, mark my words, that will happen. And I'll say, I bloody told you so. I bloody told you so. Right, just a few thanks. Thank you very much, Wizard of Ooze. A wood legend of the universe would tempt Trump. I'm not sure what the question is there, Wiz, but I would answer it if I did know what you meant there. I do apologize. Kevin Force, but thank you though. Kevin Force, 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you, my good man. You are a legend in your own underwear. Goose Springsteen. Oh, UK politics, JP. It seems I'm reaching into my wallet after all. Thank you, Goose. Paul Gilbert, known too many businessmen who never read a book. Yeah, War of 1812. Thank you, gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. And now we have some Goose questions hitting us. So let's go for it. JP, the thing about immigration is it's the most difficult change to undo once it's happened. Migrants become an electorate. Why was Gaza the #1 issue in the UK 24 election in some constituencies? Yeah, but what do you want to do about that? Do you want to deport UK citizens? I don't know. I don't. Yeah, people change. Yuval Noah Harari recently was speaking to, was it Novara Media, where he was talking about, you know, because there's a lot of conversation at the moment about our English. These people aren't English. We want English culture, English this, and he was like, there is no English. Like if you look at the history of England, if you like, then you need Anglo-Saxons, but you've got the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, the Danes. All of these people were warring people with no set culture. They're all like different chieftains and different beliefs, and it was all like a nightmare. And we harken back to this like wonderful era, what, the Anglo-Saxon era? Like, okay, so you know, you have changed. What's happening now is you've got pretty quick change, and that's what people can't handle. It's the fact that actually migration levels have been pretty accelerated over particularly the last 6 years, and you know, social cohesion, you know, challenges come through. So I'm not saying there aren't immigration issues. The question should always be, well, what are you going to do about it? Like, you know, with immigration that is here, and then what are you going to do going forward? And do you understand the impact this will have on? So, for example, collecting up 15 million illegal immigrants to the United States. Okay, that's fine. You do that as long as you do that humanely, compassionately, and following due process. I don't particularly have a problem with that. But when you like walking down the streets and just like picking up children and throwing them into an SUV, it's a little bit difficult for me to see that as a right way of doing things. So it's about due process, but then, you know, if you're collecting up 15 million migrants, you've got to understand that you aren't going to have those people working on the farms. You aren't going to have those people working on the roofs and on the building sites. So, okay, so now you're going to have inflation. As long as you understand that this will cost you. And it's the same. So I was speaking to someone this morning out the front. He was like, I went and, hey, we were talking about prostates, right? And he had a prostate exam, operation. And he was like, I was in the hospital and there was only one sort of white British person working in the whole team. Everyone else, Philippines and here and there. But he's like, but I understand why that was the case, because it's cheaper to take, and I was saying, yeah, it's cheaper to take people from the Philippines after they've been trained by the Philippines and bring them to UK and employ them as nurses rather than train up our own nurses. If you want that, then you've got to understand that we need to increase the taxes to pay for training our own nurses. So, like, you know, as long as you understand the cost involved in these things and you're happy with that, then that's fine. Just there is a lack of understanding about the impact of immigration, and I think, you know, I think we should be spending good money on training nurses and doctors and not importing them because it's cheaper to do so. But as long as, yeah, everyone understands that if you are going to cut down immigration, you're probably going to have to, you know, raise taxes because cheap labor ain't as easy to come by. And then who's going to be picking the fruit in the fields and whatnot? And this happened after Brexit. Anyway, the point being is it is complicated. And when I hear these kind of Farage-esque simple answers to complex problems, I worry. Because then it becomes all dog whistly and everyone gets really angry, and then you're justifying doing, like, if people are actually, like, the Conservative Party have literally just said we want an ICE, a UK ICE. Whereas I'm looking at ICE going, that's freaking horrific. I don't want them. I want a nice, compassionate, you know, follow the rule of law, do things properly, but like pinning people to the ground and doing this and doing that, and people in immigration courts. I don't know. I just think we're looking at the wrong model there. In my opinion, what you're seeing today in Europe with the slide to the right is largely a consequence of the growth of Islamic immigration in Europe. It's the hardest mainstream religion to integrate. I don't necessarily hugely disagree. I mean, I have critiqued Islam from a theological point of view, and I think it is what you'd want to do is espouse liberal Islam. The problem is that when you look at the Hadith and the Quran, which I have done, I've read the Quran. It's not an easy book to read, and you've got interpretive models like is it NASC, which is the approach of abrogation, which is like if the Quran contradicts itself, then one of the most justifiable ways of getting around that is to take the later stuff as trumping the earlier stuff. But the problem there is that the later stuff is when Muhammad was more violent and it became a warlike leader. So he started off as like, yeah, lovey-dovey, let's get people together, and it was very much a religion of positivity as it was small, and as it grew and grew and grew, he became basically a war leader. And then all the kind of diktats in there, the moral diktats became more and more oppressive and warlike. And so if you're saying that the only way to solve contradictions between, say, a passage of love and a passage of peace is to say, well, we take the most recent one chronologically in the Quran, then you're like, well, that's more likely to be the more violent one. So actually you start getting an interpretive framework that tends towards a more violent interpretation of the Quran, and that's problematic, and there isn't an easy way out of that. So yeah, I am, although I'm a liberal, I do understand that Islam, but I would say the same for Christianity, by the way, and in fact any organized religion I'm not a fan of. Like, I'm an atheist, right? And I've written a dozen books on critiquing theology, and so what I'm saying about Islam isn't that different to what I say about fundamentalist evangelical Christianity as well. But yeah, I it's a problem. How do you deal with religious pluralism, whereby there are very different moral interpretations, and you are a country where you have your own set of rules and laws, which are moral codifications? How do you deal with these layered approaches to morality and actually to law, because they'll have their own religious laws? And yeah, I'm not saying it's easy, but the question is, well, what do you do with that? Like, so okay, well, now you do have a significant Muslim population. What do you do with that? Like, how do you go about? You can't just, you're starting to hear like what's that word, repatriation? No, it's not repatriation. Renationalization or whatever. No, it's not. It's where they like want to send people back who are like third generation migrant families. You're like, no, that's just fascism. So these are problems. What I want are viable solutions. I think wherever there is a sense of demographic uncertainty, intercommunal tensions, economic concerns, inevitability become secondary to cultural ones. It's basically predestined now in Western Europe. So all very positive view here from Goose Springsteen. AJ Simon, I'm sorry, Goose, but you don't have to be a Muslim or an immigrant to find Gaza to be an important issue. I almost said that as well, AJ Simon. You're quite right. Essentially, in most sort of left-leaning communities, you have a lot of and student communities often as well. But it can be done, and what you want is a liberalization of Islam, right? Which is hopefully something that happens over time with osmosis. And you need to, it's all about education. I think faith schools are a bad idea. And in the UK, what's it? 37% of our primary schools are faith schools. So you don't have this in the US, but in the UK, like, our state school system has embedded in it like faith schools that are run by churches, C of E, Catholic Church, Jewish schools, Muslim schools, so on and so forth. And I think as soon as you have that, you've got a problem. I think I very much agree with the National Secular Society in the UK. Stephen Evans, I think, is he still working for them? And indeed the British Humanist Association, which is all British Humanists now, UK Humanists now they're called. We should get rid of faith schools in the UK, because it is just, I think, essentially an opportunity to divide. And so, yeah, I think that's part of your problem. In the US, Christo-fascism is certainly, Christian nationalism is a real problem in the US. So my goodness, so I have now just gone off on one, really. I was going to talk again. I'll probably leave this for my massive live stream tomorrow. It's a 12-hour live stream with Jonathan Fink. I'll be in and out of that, and I'll hopefully be co-streaming that, so I'll stream it here as well as there. Goose, you were talking about UK, 31% Reform, 21% Labour. I mean, variations on these numbers. You'll get different results here, but essentially Reform are storming, Labour are in trouble, Conservatives are in trouble, Lib Dems are doing okay, and the Greens under Zach Polanski are probably going to do better, although they'll lose their middle class kind of rural constituencies, but they'll gain more kind of activist left wing, more socialist leaning people. So I think, and they'll nick from the left of Labour. So I think they will gain and gain and gain. It's going to be very interesting. There's going to be one hell of a race for the 2029 elections. But as I said to you yesterday, and here we've got Lord Finkelstein talking about this, like the Conservative Party are in trouble. Things have got worse and worse, he says. Conservative Party has moved steadily to the right. He's advocating for a centrist positioning, but unfortunately, you know, as is asked to him by Cathy Newman, could the Conservative Party cease to exist? Yes. Oh, absolutely yes. And I think it really is in trouble. It's all about reform, and we'll see what happens and how they position themselves with the reform. I'm going to leave all my reform connections to Russia to tomorrow, and I want to go through this very, very good article tomorrow talking about Nathan Gill and Nigel Farage's Putin problem. But if I don't get a chance to do that tomorrow, I'll do it on another day. Now, I know that was a lot of me going off and talking about random things, a bit different today, but that's the way I do things. I hope that's okay for you guys. We even talked about some biblical exegesis today, and we even talked about some Quranic exegesis as well. Goodness me, I talked about the theory of abrogation. I didn't think I'd be talking about that. As I say, you know, I'm not one that's not going to critique Islam, because I think it should be untouchable. Like I told you this before, but I spent, you know, years and years writing articles and books critiquing from a very philosophical, exegetical point of view, Christian theology and whatnot, and Christian evangelicalism and fundamentalism, particularly the most extreme versions. And then when I started writing similar articles against Islam, some of my fellow liberals are like, you can't do that. It's like, why? This isn't, I'm not being Islamophobic. this is exegetical and theological. Like, you've never had a go at me for doing this of Christianity for the last 5 years. Why are you picking up on me doing it to Islam? And it's this idea that Muslims are more of a minority, and therefore any criticism looks like oppressing from a majority to a minority, whereas Christianity has this privileged position in Western society where it is the majority, whether you like it or not, in many countries, and therefore when you criticize it, it's seen like you're punching up rather than punching down. And this is the same with comedy, and this is why you often get, I think it's a whole other conversation, where comedy is more likely to be liberal, and that's why you get more liberal comedians and liberal comedy TV shows. It's because largely of the punching up type, and you're punching up against privilege and, you know, wealth accumulation, stuff like that, rather than punching down against the more vulnerable in society. But I think the same can be said about like approaches to critiquing Islam as opposed to, you know, Christianity. And I think that's why some people react in the way they do, but I think it's unjustified, because I think we should be able to criticize any belief system, especially if it can be dangerous and erroneous, dangerous, morally problematic. But what we don't want to do is alienate entire subsets of people in society, so that then there's resentment and social cohesion problems. You don't want then like a more irrational Islamophobia to come along and then take over, and where it's just kind of a shortcut for the color of the skin or whatever. So we have to be careful. Now, what I used to go around giving a talk on violence in Islam, and I remember going to the University of Exeter and giving the talk, and, you know, people in the audience are like, you know, is this wise to do this? Because, you know, I did have to think. I stopped giving that talk in the end, because I was just worried it would give ammunition to people to then more disingenuously attack Muslims, whereas what you want to do is just try and bring people to a more liberal understanding of reality and their religion. Yeah, it's all complex, and now it's not the time and place to talk about it. But anyway, I just have to some degree. Yeah, you just got to do it. You've just got to do it carefully. Okay. Anyway, thank you very much for everyone for being here. Sorry I've gone off on one. I really appreciate all of you. And Goose, thank you for your support. Thank you, AJ Simo, Paul Gilbert. Watch Trevor Noah on the Riyadh Comedy Festival. Interesting. Thanks, Paul. I will look at that. Goose Springsteen, I think it's also impossible to ignore the disparate threat of violence in aggregate. It's a lot more dangerous to be a critic of Islam or an ex-Muslim than a critic of Christianity or an ex-Christian. I don't know. It depends where you are. I think if you start becoming I don't know. It depends where you are. There are places where I wouldn't want to critique Christianity particularly, but yeah, I don't know what the larger point you have there is, other than trying to make, I guess, Muslims look more intolerant. And I don't know whether I'd need to see data really before I go down that route. I mean, part of the problem. No, I'm really close to going down a philosophical rabbit hole here and talk about heaven and hell and mortality salience and stuff to do with your idea of reality. If you think you're going to go to heaven no matter what, it kind of gives you permission to do all sorts of stuff. I don't know. Anyway, I won't go down that route. Thank you very much to everyone, and thank you, Goose, for all your very generous super chats, and thank you to all the others, and Kevin Forst, a really kind, War of 1812, Wizard of Ooze, AJ Simo, and you lot of absolute legends, Paul Gilbert included. You guys take care, and I will speak to you soon.